Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Success is a Choice Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler, and today we have a very special guest on the show for you. But before we get into the guest and introduce him, I want to remind you, please kindly smash the like, the subscribe button, however you do it, to show some love to the podcast that you listen to. We would appreciate that as well. Today's guest, Adam Neuman. He's the Chief of Staff, Strategies and Operations, General Deputy Counsel for the Big Ten Conference. A lot of you out there love the Big Ten Conference. You love college sports. So, Adam, welcome to the Success is a Choice podcast.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here today.
Awesome. We appreciate you being on the show as well. Went through really quick a sentence about who you are, but I know you're much more than that intro I just gave you. Give us a little background of you, where you came from, how you got to be at the Big Ten office.
Sure. My name is Adam Neuman, originally from Baltimore County, Maryland. After 18 years in Baltimore, I spent 2 years studying in Israel and then at Yeshiva University, where I was a speechwriter for the president of the university. It was there that I met some folks on the board, including Mark Wilf, who was the owner of the Minnesota Vikings. Used to bother him during board meetings, and eventually he was able to supply me with a legal internship in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, where I worked assiduously to make an impact in the legal department and in other areas. And then forged a relationship with then Chief Operating Officer Commissioner, now Kevin Warren. And when he chose to go to the Big Ten, I was working at a law firm called Simpson Thacher on 43rd and Lexington in New York City. And it was a no-brainer when I was offered to join the Big Ten Conference from capital markets and sleeping and spending nights at the printers. For those who know, they know, in big law. So it was a big moment for me, and now I've been here just over 3 years, and the conference is in an incredible place. I'm sure people have seen the groundbreaking media rights deals, the trips to Selma, Alabama, the Mental Health and Wellness Cabinet, and of course, the expansion with USC, UCLA. We now find ourselves from Piscataway all the way to Los Angeles, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, as you're talking there, I'm trying to do the math, and I know 5 out of 4 people are bad at math, but but the Big Ten Conference doesn't have 10 members.
No, it does not. It will have 16 members. And what you're missing also here on this beautiful map that you've done, and I love it. We also have some affiliate members. So Johns Hopkins joins us for lacrosse, and Notre Dame, the elusive Notre Dame, joins us for women's hockey.
Wait, breaking news. I heard Notre Dame is joining the Big Ten.
Not quite. You'd have to talk to Father Jenkins about that.
Heard it here first, people. Well, we joke about the Big Ten having more than just 10 schools in, but that's really an indication of what kind of branding the Big Ten has had. And you've just created this brand that is much bigger than reality, or much bigger than the reality of how many teams are in. And one of the parts of your branding is your logo. I love your logo. It's kind of creative, but talk a little bit about the branding of the Big Ten and maybe the logo creation, but just how far reaching that brand is.
Yeah, for us, what makes, intercollegiate athletics so special and what's so great about the brand is not only the folks that are actually the student athletes, but we count the folks that are just alumni of the institutions because they feel part of it. Someone who goes to Michigan State feels they are a Spartan. Someone who attends the University of Maryland feels they are a Terrapin. So I believe we have over 6 million alumni in the United States of America from Big Ten institutions. And you come to one of our offices in New York or Chicago, and you'll see Sergey Brin, the founder of Google, on the wall, and you'll see Warren Buffett, a Nebraska alum, on the wall. You'll see Tom Brady, of course, on the wall from the University of Michigan, And I think there's something special about that you don't necessarily see in professional sports. In the collegiate sports, it's really in their blood. It's in their DNA. It takes place during those formative years, 18 to 22, and you're a lifer. So we feel for ourselves, that's a great responsibility. What can we do to make sure this brand, what does it mean to be a part of the Big Ten Conference? What does it mean to be a Big Ten student athlete? And we hope what it means is launching folks the ability to look back and say, the reason I'm such a successful accountant, the reason I'm such a successful father is because I had such a great Big Ten experience. And we believe we're doing that. And every day, that's sort of where our center is. That's our core. That's our mantra, putting student athletes at the center and saying, how does this become the launching pad for the rest of their lives? Because as the NCAA will tell you during all these March Madness commercials, 99% of student athletes will not go on to be a professional athlete. And what they don't tell you is that of the 1% that do, that's not usually a long duration. For every Tom Brady, there are others who are playing in different countries. And we know even in women's basketball, for example, playing in other countries, you're getting more money in other countries than you are in the US. So it's not always the most stable family situation. So for us, we got to prepare them for life.
Well, I grew up in Michigan, grew up a huge Big Ten fan, and still a college sports fan. And to this day, I don't know how many times I get tripped up thinking Maryland is in the ACC. And I know that they've been in the Big Ten for quite a while now, and I still get tripped up every once in a while. I think we all have an Achilles heel somewhere in our thinking, or we get tricked somewhere. Maryland might be the number one thing I get tricked on all the time.
Maryland's tough for me. I'm from Baltimore, as I mentioned, and my parents are both alums of Maryland. My brother went to medical school there. My sister-in-law went to social work school. We have a lot of that in our blood. And I grew up, with Winston-Salem, with the Demon Deacons of Wake Forest, and Virginia, and Florida State, and Duke, of course, and North Carolina, and Chapel Hill, and even that was an adjustment, sort of as a fan. And now that I'm contractually obligated to be neutral on 14 teams. Maryland is very much proud to be part of the Big Ten Conference.
Okay, so as a lawyer, and you're still a practicing lawyer, or you still have your law degree, how many states are you licensed in?
I'm licensed in Illinois, DC, New York, and actually the Supreme Court of the United States. In case you need me to run point with some of our justices, I can be there to help.
We will keep that in mind. But so you don't have to be licensed in all the Big Ten states?
No, you do not. We're licensed where we're headquartered, and then the other pieces can sometimes help for other pieces. But, a good general counsel or a good deputy general counsel is typically, if there are times where you need to hire counsel for a specific state, you're going to hire that person. You're not going to be licensed in that area.
So as a licensed attorney, you just said that you're contractually obligated. I want to really find out if that's true. In your contract, does it say you have to root for all of them equally?
I can't get to the exact specifics of the contractual language, but I will tell you that there is a high bar that is required when it comes to items like gambling on sports. So, for example, if you're working at the Big Ten Conference, you cannot gamble on any NCAA sanctioned sport at any level. So you can't gamble on the Ravens versus the Steelers because we don't want any thoughts or preponderance of gambling in the system. And the same is sort of true of the teams. And I think everyone in the Big Ten sort of values different teams differently, either because it's where they're from or they enjoy the administrators or the student athletes at a certain school particularly more. But there really needs to be an emphasis of neutrality because, every day we're trying to make sure that there's equity on the field and we're trying to make sure there's equity in the pool. And if there's going to be equity in those places, you have to remain, sort of having that equity when you're, speaking about these terrific institutions. And they make it easy. These are really, really great schools. And anyone who's had a chance to visit their campuses, and if you haven't, I'd encourage you to do it because they're terrific campuses and very welcoming environments, and there's a lot to learn.
Have there been some games, contests, matches, situations that really stand out to you over the last couple of years that come to the forefront of your mind of, man, that was really significant? Like that was an amazing game, or that was just an amazing play or an amazing moment. You're not necessarily rooting for a Big Ten school or rooting for one school over the other, but the totality of that event or that situation just is memorable.
Yeah. I'll give you one where I was able to root. And I think, it was 2 years ago in the heart of COVID. Clemson was playing Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl, and there were very few people in this stadium. This was a massive stadium in New Orleans, and very few people were allowed to be there. And I remember distinctly showing up early for a very, very early meeting that day and seeing Justin Fields by himself working out on what I would have thought as a layman, a pretty routine drill, a footwork drill. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, this guy really, really wants it. And for those who remember, this was not a game where Ohio State was favored. Clemson had Trevor Lawrence. I think they were the favorites that year, and it was a very difficult matchup, but Justin put on a show and Ohio State put on a show, and they beat them pretty good by 2 or 3 touchdowns to make it to the championship against Alabama, where they lost, unfortunately. But I remember watching that game and thinking, wow, like this is a monumental moment for the Big Ten. This is really big, because that season we had actually postponed the football season. It was canceled at first, and then we brought it back, and Ohio State only had a chance to play a few games to get in, and they were undefeated, and folks were sort of doubting their ability and how good they were. And then for them to kind of punch Clemson in the mouth, I think was a really cool environment. And then to be screaming after every touchdown catch with like 6 people, because nobody's in the stadium screaming. It just felt like, wow, we've come over some hump with COVID. We're moving forward in this country a little bit. And that was a really monumental moment for me. And I remember also walking back to the hotel, and folks are always telling me like, it's crazy and it's crowded and people are screaming, and there was nothing. There was nobody in the streets because nobody was watching this game. I guess on TV they were watching, but they weren't at the game. So that's definitely an environment and a time that really stood out to me that I think about.
So as chief of staff, what does that entail? You're essentially the guy that gets things done. You make things happen, I would imagine. Talk to us a little bit about what chief of staff the Big Ten means.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is playing utility player, like plugging in holes and trying to fix things as they come around, but really trying to ensure that the commissioner's strategic vision is happening at all levels. And you have to do it in a certain way, because you don't want to like step on other people's departments, but sometimes that's not necessarily what the commissioner wants to see or wants to do. So it's given me a very broad range of experience across sponsorships and finance, and of course legal, where I have a separate hand in, and football operations and Olympic sports operations and all these different facets, and really trying to highlight and ensure that things are running smoothly. So sort of someone who's raising their hand a lot and offering to help.
Well, you mentioned that you knew Commissioner Warren from days back, the Minnesota Vikings. Talk a little bit about how that transition of getting to the Big Ten, and also talk a little bit piggybacking on that, Commissioner Warren and what he's meant in his leadership.
Yeah, Kevin is a rare individual. He's fearlessly inclusive, and he's inclusive in a way that really I think people look up to. He's always trying to get the best out of people, and he's agnostic to things like race and religion, age. And what I mean by that is, when I was an intern for the Minnesota Vikings, very easily the chief operating officer could have said, I don't want anything to do with the legal intern of the Minnesota Vikings. I have a massive operation to run. I'm building a stadium, and I'm building a practice facility, and I'm trying to win a Super Bowl. I don't need to spend time with the legal intern here. But he really did. He got to know me. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I keep kosher. He would buy me kosher food. He knew the kosher certifications on products. He really sought to get to know me better. And he sort of emboldened me in that way with the staff. And when somebody at his level is demonstrating that type of class and that type of dignity, everybody else sort of has to follow through, or you're not really following the mission of the organization. It's one thing for your supervisor to do it, but when the leader of the organization is really sort of the epitome of inclusivity, it really helps people thrive, and it allows people to really feel like they're themselves. So I felt like when I was with the Vikings, I was able to do things that maybe a typical intern for a different football team may have not had the opportunity to do. And I think in that way, I was able to create a strong reputation for getting work done. So, when he made his move to the Big Ten, I thought that, I had a shot at it, and I did, and I was able to interview and, get a job here at the conference, which was really terrific. And as far as his impact on the conference, I think it's been, remarkable when you think about the things he's done from a mental health perspective, from a race perspective. There was a terrific documentary on just this past night, last night at 6:30 on Big Ten Network, talking about our trip to Selma and Montgomery, Alabama, where we walked the Edmund Pettus Bridge as a conference together, and we visited different museums and different pieces of legislature. And it was just a remarkable experience to revisit Bloody Sunday and some of those issues and tie that into the fabric of who we are, to think about his expansion with USC and UCLA, things I don't think anyone could have thought of, whether it's the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, everyone's calling it stunning and incredible. For him to introduce an NFL model of how to view football games from CBS and Fox and Peacock and FS1 and the Big Ten Network, all of these new, more business-oriented initiatives coupled with his inclusivity has moved the conference forward in ways that I don't think people could have seen. And I feel like the Big Ten Conference is thriving in a very powerful way. You'd be hard pressed to find universities that don't want to be part of the Big Ten Conference right now.
We'll talk a little bit more about that TV show about going back to Selma, Alabama, and the athletes and what they were doing and how that came about, and how people can go back and watch that if they missed that.
Yeah, in the advent of the situation, of course, with George Floyd, I think Kevin felt as the lone African-American commissioner of a Power 5 conference and the first African-American of a Power 5 conference. And he's been the first of many things. He was the highest ranking African-American on the business side of sports when he was the chief operating officer of the Minnesota Vikings. He felt like he wanted to start a coalition that really focused on race relations, especially in sports. And that's how the Anti-Hate, Anti-Racism Coalition, now known as the Equality Coalition, came to be. And one of their initiatives was the Big Life series from Selma to Montgomery. And these are trips and educational field trips. And I know Kevin feels that it's one thing to talk about things. It's another thing to see and experience. And somewhere in this picture you're showing is me. I don't know where, but I know I'm somewhere, maybe in the back. I think I might see myself, or maybe I'm in the front row. Oh, there I am. And it was just an incredible experience to march with African-Americans, with white people, with Asian people, with people of all walks of life, which was also important to the commissioner, that everybody was there united together, and to get such an incredible education about what happened on Bloody Sunday and what still is happening today. So anyone who wants to watch this, I know there's going to be a repeat on the Big Ten Network over the next few weeks, and I'm sure it'll be on YouTube in some capacity. And then, of course, on our Big Ten app, you can watch this, but definitely worth watching. About an hour of content, and just powerful to hear student athletes reflect on their experiences and to kind of size up how much has changed since then. What has changed since then and what has not changed, and what's the great work that's left to be done. But we'll be headed back to Selma, Alabama in July. And I know people are greatly anticipating round 2 of this trip.
Well, and at the end of the day, that's really a lot of what the student athlete experience and what college sports is all about. Obviously, everyone would like to make money and be a professional athlete, be Tom Brady, the GOAT. But as you said, 99% of people aren't going to turn pro in that sport. But they all are going to be thinkers. They all are going to be citizens. They're all going to be family members and friends and business people or whatever. And so getting those experiences and learning to see other perspectives and seeing the whole forest and not just their tree is a lot of what the Big Ten has been about.
Absolutely. And, education is going to be at the forefront of a Big Ten academic experience, and it always will be. There is a lot of change going on in college athletics, certainly with NIL and other issues that are being closely monitored both by the NCAA and the Big Ten, and by Congress and by the Supreme Court for sure. And we remain conditioned to believe that, the student part of the athlete is going to be really important, and the educational experience is going to be really important. And what I like to say about a trip like this is nobody asked the commissioner to do this, and nobody asked the Big Ten to do this. This wasn't, you got to do this. This is part of the job description. This was hours, days, weeks of people's time working overtime to put on extra work to do something this great and this awesome. And I think you got to sometimes put your money where your mouth is, and sometimes you just have to work hard to get things done, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Well, we will get back to Adam in just a moment, but we want to remind everybody that this episode is made possible by the leadershipplaybook.com. Stronger cultures, better teammates, positive leaders. The leadershipplaybook.com. Great teams have great teammates. And so if you're looking to develop a stronger culture, check out the leadershipplaybook.com. Use coupon code CHOICE, as in success is a choice, to get 25% off your membership. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the Chief of Staff of the Big Ten, Adam Neuman. Adam, I was going to tease right before that. I forgot to tease that when we come back, we're going to find out who the best coach is in the Big Ten. But I didn't tease that. Plus, I wouldn't ask you that. I wouldn't put you on the spot. But you've been around a lot of ADs, a lot of presidents, a lot of coaches. What are some common traits? Are there some qualities that you see across the board among some of the greatest leaders in the Big Ten that make them so good?
Yeah, I think people really traditionally buy into integrity. And I think integrity is sort of a lost currency. And I get it on some level. Sometimes we all want to be something that we're not. And we all want to, try and put on a show sometimes, or try and be tougher or meaner or lighter or kinder. But I have found that the athletic directors and the coaching staffs in particular that rely on really being themselves and asking other people to be themselves, those are the ones that are having the most successful teams. And what I always tell people, and I urge people to really look closely at, especially in the college ranks, is really look at the high school rankings of folks coming in. Look at those ESPN 60s, look at those ESPN 100s, look at the 247 Sports 300s, look at those, and then look at the teams who are winning. And you're going to be surprised. Yes, Alabama and Georgia are terrific. Nobody's going to deny that. But there are several schools that have been in this sort of CFP Final Four. I know it's expanding, that, kind of are top 25 recruiting classes, sometimes top 30. Maybe they have a couple key transfers. Maybe a quarterback who was unheralded. You saw that at Purdue, of course, is stepping up in a way that you wouldn't expect. And a lot of that is coaching. A lot of that is the culture that they're building. And then the second thing I'd say is look at the facilities, because sometimes you'll say, how on earth would this place compete? This gym they're sharing it with 20 other sports. This program has their own gym for just football student athletes. They might not even see the other student athletes. This place has whirlpools. And I'm not saying that facilities don't help. They do help with recruiting, and they do help with, accruing talent and building talent and getting people better and happier and more excited for playing the sport. But at the end of the day, when the coaching staffs have a level of integrity, when they level with the players, and someone who else does a great job with this, I'll shout out, is PJ Fleck in Minnesota, just a terrific person and a terrific guy who's really himself. Like it or hate it, he is himself, and he's a terrific person. And I think he recruits different kind of kids that you wouldn't necessarily expect to come to a program like Minnesota. And I think that's why they're so successful every year.
Well, you mentioned that you grew up in the Baltimore area. Are there people that you looked up to, athletes that you looked up to, that you were role models that were like, man, I want to be like them one day, or I want to play like them? What's kind of your background in sports?
My background in sports is that's sort of what I did as a kid. That's what I watched. That's what I loved. One of my role models, and a lot of role models that you meet that you've never met before, is the late Len Bias, who I never even got to see play. I actually have a signed basketball from him, which took me about 5 years to find. It's one of those things that is just really difficult to find. It's not necessarily the most expensive piece, but it's just like who has that basketball of, Len Bias being signed. So I finally got that in my office, super excited about it. And what I loved about Len, and I think the lesson of Len Bias, is it's almost like a dream unfulfilled. It's like he was so talented and so incredible. And then at the peak, it just didn't work out for him, when he had his cocaine overdose and a terrible tragedy, and the legal issues that, came from that, and what happened to the University of Maryland program, all sort of with a snap of the fingers, with Lefty Driesell resigning and the athletic director resigning, and sort of Maryland being in the hole for a little bit for everything that happened with Len. But Len played with such exuberance, and Michael Wilbon in a famous documentary on 30 for 30 called Without Bias, which people should definitely watch. He talks about when Michael Jordan would play against Len, and you really couldn't tell who was better. And it's just like a shocking phenomenon to think about what Len Bias could have been and how he could have added to the legacy of the Boston Celtics and maybe extended Larry Bird's career a little bit. But I think that's kind of a Baltimore attitude, to be honest with you, sort of what happened to Len. Not the death per se, but the idea that it's not always the best that rises to the top. It's someone who works hard, because Len was not a highly touted recruit. And you think about the Baltimore Ravens Super Bowls, I don't think either of them, they were the best team on the field in either game, but they sort of just made it work. They grinded it out. And we'll see what the Orioles can bring for us in Baltimore in the next few years. I see they have a great farm system coming up, but we'll see what happens at Camden Yards. But I think Baltimore is a gritty city. It's a tough city. And I don't think there's a lot of airs about people there. So I think I always was attracted to basketball players like that it wasn't about the show. It was about the production. It was about, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do my work, and I'm going to get for my team a win. And I think those are kind of the athletes that I've always been attracted to.
Well, we mentioned a little bit about branding earlier and the importance of it as far as the Big Ten's concerned. But when you mentioned Len Bias, I remember I bought, before he died, but he had signed a contract with Reebok, and that was the first time I had ever heard of Reebok. And I was in a mall, went into like a Foot Locker or someplace like that, and saw a Reebok shirt for the very first time. And I bought a Reebok shirt as a youngster, just because Len Bias had signed with them, and I now knew about Reebok.
I love that. That makes me so happy. I literally love that. And that is exactly the way this stuff works. It's so good.
Yeah. And I've done that. I mean, there's so many things. Even when I was a young kid, a real young kid, one of my favorite race car drivers was Cale Yarborough. Some people might know him, but he was sponsored by Hardee's. And I finally saw Hardee's one day when my parents were driving, and I begged him to go in there because Cale Yarborough would be there. That was my thought, is that if we stop at that Hardee's, he will be there. But, the branding part of it and who people sponsor or who sponsors are being associated with is such a big deal. And now with NIL, name, image, and likeness, it's even come more to the forefront. What do you see is on the horizon, or talk a little bit about the NIL and how that's branding athletes and giving athletes maybe some more opportunities that they've not had in the past?
Yeah, I think overall it's great for student athletes to have the opportunity to make money and be entrepreneurial. That's something that they're learning in school, right? Like you go to a business class on entrepreneurialism or, business ethics. Like this is a great thing for them to have the ability to say, I do great things for my university. I love my university, but I also want the opportunity to make some money off of some of the things that I'm doing. So I think NIL is tricky in terms of how it works with collectives and inducements and things of that nature. And as we spoke about earlier about the importance of being a student athlete in education, you always want to make sure the reason that a student is going to a university is because of the education. You want them to go to a specific university because they feel like it's a great place to be, including with the coaching staff and the coaches that they're giving them that type of education too. You don't necessarily want it to be because a school is offering a certain amount of money and a different school is offering less money. Now, in reality, is that happening? I can't say for sure. It appears like it might be. People are saying that it's happening, and that's something that needs to be more closely regulated. And I can promise you that in the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to figure out how to make this work a little bit differently, because it's a little bit of the wild, wild west out there right now.
So when you were an athlete in high school, or if you had played in the college ranks, who would you wanted to be associated with? Who would you have wanted to sponsor Adam Neuman?
Who would I wanted to have sponsored Adam Neuman? That's a really good question. Maybe like Microsoft or Apple. I don't know why. It's like some like massive company. I'd start there, and then I'd probably pick up something where I could get some great free stuff, like some local car dealership. If they would like give me and my family a car or something, that'd be pretty sweet. So that's like the local spot. And then like the big picture, what are we doing with the world? IBM, something like that. I feel like that'd be fun to be in a commercial like that.
And see, that's why you ended up being a lawyer and I ended up being a coach, because immediately I thought of, well, I'd love SpaghettiOs because I love to eat SpaghettiOs as a kid. And so that's who I would want, because I get all kinds of SpaghettiOs. But you're thinking so much big picture. You're playing chess and I'm just playing checkers here.
I don't know about that. I think it's just different levels of practicality.
So The Athletic named you one of their 40 game changers under the age of 40. One of the best, or a coach, an AD, a leader, somebody that's making a difference in college sports. What is something that you kind of hang your hat on? What's one or two things that you're the most proud of in your couple of years with the Big Ten?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is what I told Lincoln Riley, which is that it's the only time he and I will be on a list together. So I felt pretty good about that. And when I see Caleb Williams, I'll tell him the same thing. So if Caleb Williams becomes what everybody wants him to be, and he becomes some MVP Hall of Fame quarterback, I mean, even if he doesn't, he's a Heisman winner, of course. I will go to the grave telling people that Caleb Williams and I are 40 under 40 together. The things that I hang my hat on, I'm really proud of the media rights deal. I feel like the team really came together in a big way, and not to use a pun, but really broadcasted how great the conference is. We have 28 sports. We have incredible student athletes. They have incredible stories. We have all these alumni. We have people that really live and die by Big Ten sports. For us to really show people in a monetary way, for someone to write a check to reflect that really shows that we're doing something right, that people really love the Big Ten Conference. So that piece to me was really powerful. And, for me, I had the chance for a couple of years to chair our mental health and wellness cabinet. I think it's an area that's still heavily stigmatized. And I think it's an area that is still really tricky, especially for people of color. And we got to do better. We got to make sure there are more therapists on campus. We have to make sure the student-athlete ratio for therapy is better. We have to make sure that people have more resources to ensure that they're feeling good and not just physically feeling good. So those are two pieces that really matter to me. I think the expansion piece is a really big deal. Anytime you can sort of grab geography, that's obviously a big deal. The last three prior to this were Rutgers, Maryland, and Nebraska, terrific institutions, and are doing great in the Big Ten Conference. And we're just so looking forward to the expansion, with USC and UCLA. And this past week, I had a chance to go visit both of those schools for integration meetings out in Los Angeles and meet with the athletic directors and some student athletes and the administrators and the legal teams, and to kind of walk those campuses and say, wow, you really don't need an indoor football facility out here in February. You guys are doing just great with your outdoor tennis courts. Everything's just doing great out here in California. I think we're looking forward to spending more time out there and really stretching ourselves coast to coast. So I think about expansion, I think about the TV rights, and I think about the mental health cabinet when I think about some of the things that I think helped maybe push me over the edge for that award that I'm really grateful to have. And a major shout out to, my colleagues who, you can't really do anything without a great team.
Well, as a fan of college sports, us fans, we'll sit back and we'll read, ESPN.com, or we'll scour the internet, read all this stuff about things going on without giving us, some secret conversations behind closed doors or anything like that. But maybe when you're talking about expansion, how you got those California schools to join the Big Ten, what is maybe something that most of us don't realize or don't know about that process, without giving any trade secrets away, but maybe just something that maybe is an unusual thing, or something that most of us wouldn't know just by reading the first couple paragraphs of a news story?
I think that the academics are critically important. I don't think folks really understand that all of the Big Ten universities, except for Nebraska, which has had this status, have what's called an AAU status. Not AAU like leagues for coaches and your coaching brain and those great tournaments that everybody goes to, but it's a different demarcation that signals a certain amount of research that the university is doing, a certain level of excellence for the faculty, a certain level of whatever it's GPA or whatever test scores that are required to get into the schools. And that's really important to our presidents and chancellors. And I think also folks sometimes don't understand who's running college athletics. And the reality is that, and this is just open stuff, like the Big Ten Conference reports to the presidents and chancellors of those universities. Now, those presidents and chancellors rely very heavily on their athletic directors and their senior women administrators and their faculty athletic reps and all of their legal teams and their donors and a lot of other people. But at the end of the day, the folks that get the votes are the presidents and chancellors. And presidents and chancellors are academics. Mm-hmm. And those academics really care about these other institutions. And one of the first things that happened when I remember UCLA and USC and the interest that was expressed there was they knew so many of the faculty at UCLA and USC. They knew the deans, they knew the presidents, they knew the chancellors, they knew the provosts. And that makes it so much easier to say, wow, like this is a fit. We are a actual academic fit in these places. And I think that's a major, major piece that is probably not sexy and doesn't get spoken about enough, but I promise you, we're from my seat when we were doing all the different tabulations and calculations of what schools would fit, what schools would not fit, and how this process works, academics really rises to the top.
Well, you just signed a massive media rights contract for the Big Ten Conference. Is it true that would have been even bigger if Tom Brady hadn't been paid so much by Fox to retire? Is that true? Is that what I'm hearing?
I can't speculate on any of that, but I will tell you this, and I think this is interesting. I think Tom Brady is going to be terrific and amazing, but I do find it odd that everybody just assumes an athlete will be really good on the mic. Tom, I think, is an exception, actually, and will be terrific and amazing. And Greg Olson has been terrific, and Tony Romo is amazing, and all these guys are wonderful. But I think it's so weird when we're just like, here's a great player at football, and he's going to be terrific on the mic. Why? Those are totally different skill sets. It feels like a really weird calculation to me. And I think more often than not, people come and they sort of like flame out. So when you see so much money being given, and granted, Tom is the GOAT and he's so articulate and terrific and handsome and wonderful and obviously knowledgeable about the sport and is going to provide incredible context. And I would have done the money too, no question. But I just find people make it like it's like a sure thing. Like this is just going to work. And I'm like, what? I don't understand that. Like that's really hard to do, to make that transition. Those are totally different skill sets.
Absolutely. And, we have obviously a lot of coaches, educators, leaders listening to this, but we also have, college students listening to this as well, or younger professionals listening to this. If they want to get kind of into not necessarily your level or that high executive level, but if they want to get into an organization for athletics, they want to get into kind of your industry, what would be some advice for people getting into the sports industry?
you need to hustle in a way that you've never hustled before. And this is a topic that I speak about often and regularly with folks getting in. I'll give you a good example. I spoke to somebody 2 days ago, and it was a friend's friend, and they asked if they could speak to me for 15 minutes about the sports industry and breaking in, and they had a great resume. And I said, sure, yeah, I'm happy to take a call. And I knew within the first 5 minutes they were never going to get a job in sports. And why? Because I said to them, I said, well, what do you want to do in sports? And they said, well, I want to work for the Islanders, the Nets, the Knicks, the Yankees, the Mets, the Liberty. So I basically cut them off. I said, so you want to work in New York is what you're telling me. And they said, yeah. I said, this is not going to work. Like, this is not how this works. Like, if you're not willing to mow the lawn for the worst football team in a location that you, for whatever reason, don't like, you're not going to get a job. And that's not to say you can't get a job with the Yankees or one of these premier wonderful teams that I just listed. It's more about the attitude and the mindset. I have never met anybody that did not have a mindset breaking into sports that was like, I will literally do anything to get in. That's your competition. It's that exclusive, it's that exciting, and it's that fun. And because there's such a desire to get into it, I think folks sometimes even underestimate the amount of time and hustle and requirements. I mean, you should be on LinkedIn 2 hours a day, studying every single type of position that there are in sports. I didn't know what a chief revenue officer was 4 years ago. I have no problem admitting that. I didn't know that was a job. I didn't know what it meant. Why would I know what that means? Now, that's a big job in a lot of different companies. Now I know what it means. Now I know what it takes. Maybe I'll be one day. Who knows? But you have to know everything about these organizations to be able to break into them. And you have to be willing to go to lectures and go to podcasts and send cold emails and calls and find your second connections and buzz me and say, hey, like, do you happen to know this person? It looks like they're looking for something online. Like, you got to be really after it. And if you're not, I don't think it's going to happen for you.
Well, I see even in the coaching industry, I see so many assistant coaches who don't want to do the laundry or don't want to have to carry a bag. You know, the managers can do that or whatever, or they don't sweep the floors or they don't drive their coach somewhere or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, you've got to make yourself so invaluable. Like, no one can do without you. And you've got to be a sponge and you've got to make people better. And I think that's a big thing is, are you making people better? Are you making your organization better?
100%. And it's an attitude, right? It's an ability to really dig deep and say, can I sort of put myself on the floor a little bit? Am I willing to sort of do something that I'm not inclined to do in a regular and ordinary situation? But that's what it takes. You're not just signing up to be on a team. You're signing up to be in a really exclusive place. I'll also add that I think people underestimate how many people work in these organizations. So the Big Ten Conference has 54 full-time employees for almost $1 billion in revenue. Now, the reason the model works is because at our athletic departments, they each have 300 or 400 people, but still, it's not that many folks when you really break it down, especially when you take out like scouting, coaching, strength training, real jobs that you require like a very particular expertise, physical trainers and, occupational therapists, physical therapists, mental health therapists. Like, once you eliminate sort of all those people that are assisting with those type of things, there's very few like business positions in these organizations. And if you really want them, you're gonna have to really, really work for it.
Well, we have a lot of coaches, a lot of educators, leaders listening to this, but a lot of times, and I ask you this, one, because you're in athletics, from a high level, you see some of this stuff, but two, you're also a lawyer. A lot of times coaches, leaders, educators, they make mistakes. They screw up. They don't think about certain things. Sometimes they get maybe narrow focus or they take shortcuts or whatever. But from a legal standpoint, what are some things that maybe we should be a little bit more aware of and maybe, double check and triple check and think about and maybe not just get so caught up in the X's and O's or caught up in just, doing my quote unquote job, but think about a higher level and see the bigger picture, play chess as opposed to checkers from a legal or a legal standpoint.
I think cultural elements are a really big deal. And I think the law, especially when you're working in a firm or you're working in a environment, you just always really want to be careful about, who you're talking to, what you're talking about. You want to think about where your hands are, who you're touching, what you're seeing. All those kind of things are really, really important. And I think folks sometimes will they'll have a document that they shouldn't have, and it hurts them more than they think it does to even have that in their office, because it puts them in a certain mode of liability. Maybe they're meeting after hours with a colleague in an environment and there's a closed door, and it's just not a smart thing to do. That door should be opened at all times, just so there's some deniability. And I think when you're a lawyer, you think about those things, but if you're just like a well-adjusted person, you might just be like, oh, this is no big deal. But it's a little bit of a dog eats dog world out there. So I would always advise people to take very serious precautions with, when you're meeting with people, how long you're meeting with people for, what documents you're looking at, where you're storing your documents, why you think you should be storing those documents, when you're emailing things, why you're emailing them, when you're texting things, why you're texting them. That's a really big piece to it. I think when you're thinking about from a legal standpoint about just kind of working in the workplace.
Yeah. So essentially just think about things more than you might. And also there's the news and sports media gives us plenty of examples of coaches or ADs that mess up or do something. Learn from that. Don't just say, well, that happened at, Penn State. That happened at Michigan State. That happened at Michigan, Illinois, whatever. Say, well, that could happen here. How can I learn from that? How can we put some things in place so that doesn't happen here?
And a lot of those issues, I think both of those institutions that you just noted would tell you that things are different, and had things been different and protocols have been installed in a certain way, then it would have prevented certain, inevitabilities from happening. And there's no question about that. So you got to be vigilant, especially when you're working with kids. It's just really important.
Yeah. And when something does happen, don't just turn a blind eye in terms of, that happened at Penn State. That would never happen here. Or that happened so-and-so. That would never happen here. Well, learn from that. It's not just Michigan State or whoever puts these protocols in place so it's better for there. Well, how can we be better, even though it didn't happen here? How can we be better for the future as well?
Yeah.
And learn from those things. So we'll get you out on this last question here, but what are you excited about moving forward with the Big Ten? And I know this is tough because there's so many things you could be excited about, but what are the things on the horizon or the things you're most excited about moving forward with the Big Ten?
I think some of the things I'm excited about are seeing some of our Olympic sports start really achieving revenue. You look at wrestling, which is just crushing it in certain schools. And, it's just a really, really interesting, fun sport, a lot of grit, a lot of toughness. We see really women's basketball just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And our tournaments are getting better engagement on television, and we're getting more butts in seats, as we like to say. We're seeing more people, come into the stands. So this year, our women's basketball tournament is in Minneapolis and our men's is in Chicago. And really looking forward to both of those tournaments. Very much looking forward to the horizon of USC and UCLA coming in 2024. That's on its way. And then our media partners, of course, integrating them and making sure we have the right theme songs and the right talent, and making sure all of our, Saturday Night Live at the Big Ten with NBC right after Notre Dame and right before Saturday Night Live is going to be a prime spot. And, just really making sure that the Big Ten Conference is the best conference in the country. That's important to us. We believe that in our hearts, and we want to make sure that we're winning also on the field as well. So looking forward to more championships, and we believe that this is the best place to spend your intercollegiate career, and we're going to continue doing that and keeping our eyes open. And as our conference expands to 16 and the 28 sports that we have, we're just excited to see our student athletes thrive and continue to thrive.
Well, he's Adam Neuman, and you can follow him online at Adam J. Neuman. That's Neuman. So Adam J. Neuman. And you can also visit the Big Ten's website at big10.org, big10.org. Adam, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your insights. Awesome stuff. We appreciate what the Big Ten is doing for all student athletes, not just the ones that are going to be turning pro, but we appreciate all that you're doing to give student athletes the best chance to have a good experience as well. And for everybody watching this, whether you're watching this live, YouTube, LinkedIn, Rumble, Facebook, or you're listening to it on the Success is a Choice podcast network, we appreciate you tuning in. Remember, please kindly smash that little like button or tap that like or the subscribe button. Drop some 5 stars in there if you want. That's a great way to help others find this show and get some great insights like we had from Adam today. So until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?